Pro Tools now supports MIDI effect plugins that enable you to quickly generate and manipulate MIDI to realize your musical ideas. From triggering multiple notes and modifying velocity and pitch, to automatically generating musical riffs, rhythms, and arpeggiations, you can now tweak and automate MIDI effects in real time. Let's look at how all this works in more detail. There is now a flow of MIDI data on an instrument track. It starts with either live input or MIDI data from clips on the timeline. From there, the data flows from top to bottom of the instrument track's insert in a chain. When a MIDI plugin or virtual instrument is inserted on an instrument track, the MIDI output selector of that track is automatically set to the MIDI chain input. As you add MIDI plugins to the track, MIDI data will flow between each of the plugins. Bringing up the MIDI chain, you will see a diagram of how the data flows between each node. And just like with audio plugins, you can now easily reorder them to change the creative flow. To insert a MIDI plugin, click an Insert on an instrument track and choose MIDI plugins from the menu. Here you will see a list of currently installed MIDI plugins. If you have your display preferences set to show plugins by manufacturer or category in manufacturer, you will also see the manufacturer to have a more detailed look at the list. Once instantiated, this MIDI plugin will be the start of the MIDI chain on this track. Additional MIDI plugins can be added to enable other types of processing of MIDI data. At the end of the chain, a virtual instrument is inserted to play back the processed MIDI data of the track. For this example, we have the Avid Note Stack plugin first in the chain to create a set of notes from a simple synth melody. And now with Note Stack being taken out of bypass, you can hear the harmony notes being driven by the melody line. Next, we have Eon Art MIDI Edition from Medallics to take the notes generated from the Note Stack and arpeggiate them in a creative pattern. This MIDI data is then fed into Expand from Air to play back the MIDI data from Eon Art. You can also route the MIDI chain output of a track to the MIDI input of another MIDI or instrument track to either record the processed MIDI data or stack sounds using the same MIDI information. This is especially useful to capture the random output of a combination of plugins to edit and use creatively at a later time. To do this, create a new MIDI or instrument track and set the MIDI input selector of that track to the original instrument track's MIDI chain output. The new MIDI or instrument track can be record-enabled to either record the MIDI output or have it play another virtual instrument to stack sounds. Note that not all virtual instrument plugins support passing the MIDI chain data. There are several MIDI plugins included with Pro Tools from both Avid and select third-party partners. These plugins give you a good palette of both utility processing and deep creative options. And because Pro Tools Effects plugins use the same AAX format, developers can create all kinds of powerful and innovative MIDI plugins to give users even more creative choices. AAX plugins also support higher resolution and accuracy than just MIDI CC control information. And they can be controlled and automated just like any other AAX plugin, including accessing them from any Yukon-based control surface, from the free Avid Control app, the compact but powerful S1 control surface, all the way up to the flagship S6 console. MIDI plugins offer you many ways to manipulate MIDI data and extend your creativity. From simple pitch and velocity processing to complex note and arpeggiation control, plugins give you new ways to work with MIDI.